A study of the parables of Jesus. Lesson 17. Parables of lost things. Luke 15, 1 through 33. Part 2. The parable of the lost son. The literary setting of this and Palestinian background are the same as in the previous two parables. However, Jesus deliberately makes this parable ambiguous. By ambiguous, I mean he leaves the ending unfinished. We talk about Schubert's unfinished symphony. This is an unfinished parable. It's the only one of the parables that Jesus doesn't bring to a close. And that's not an accident. That's not just something that happened. It is deliberate on his part, because at the time he spoke the parable, the Jewish religious and political leaders still had an opportunity to do the right thing. And the question was, would they do it? Let's look at the meaning of the parable as a whole. Jesus contrasts his view of the value of each member of the covenant people with that of the Jewish religious and political leaders. They valued only those who met their legalistically rigid standards and rejected all others as being no longer members of the covenant people. To the contrary, Jesus saw all those born into the covenant as covenant members, and all of them of equal value. His position offended the Jewish religious and political leaders because that made them the same value as tax collectors and sinners. That's the element they could not tolerate in Jesus. He actually told them at times, you are no better. In fact, they are better than you are because they are responding to my call. And any religious leader I've ever seen wouldn't like that. But we all are the same value. This contrast is highlighted by the different attitudes toward the younger son shown by the father and the older brother. It is important to notice that this parable ends without any resolution of the conflict. Let's look at the meaning of the individual elements. The Father, of course, is God primarily, but Christ as his representative on earth. The younger son symbolizes the tax collectors and the sinners. He also prefigures the Gentiles who would later be grafted in to the root that was Israel. The journey into a far country symbolizes the departure from God of his covenant people. That is, there were many of them who had gone a long ways from him. But the irony here is that the people who were sure that they had not gone any distance had gone even further away from God than had the tax collectors and the sinners. And also, it symbolized the distance that the Gentiles were from what God wanted people to be. the feeding of the herd of swine symbolizes the degradation of God's covenant people and of the Gentiles at the time Jesus spoke this parable. There could have been no greater degradation for a Jewish boy than to feed unclean animals. The coming to his senses symbolizes the life-changing decision to respond to the gospel of Christ on the part of both groups. Jesus meant it when he said, "I came that you might have life, and that more abundantly." We don't really live until we allow Christ to set us free to become what God intended for his people to be. The Father's running to meet the Son. I never think about that I don't think of a preacher friend of mine. When he was an undergraduate, when both of us were an undergraduate in 1950 and 51 at Abilene Christian University, he was the last person. He was the class clown. He was the one that people looked to for jokes and frivolity and not any deep thinking. And when I knew that God had touched him, he preached a sermon, one of the most moving sermons I ever heard. The sermon was entitled, "Will God Run?" And friends, that's the gospel in a nutshell. God will run to meet the sinner. This symbolizes God and Christ's eagerness to accept both his chastised covenant people and later the Gentiles. Please note the contrast between God and Christ's eagerness and the haughty rejection of both groups on the part of the Jewish political and religious leaders. The final scene, which is pictured outside the celebration of this present age. Now notice, this celebration is in this present age. We celebrate the joy of the Messiah. This is the wedding feast of the Lamb. This is the great banquet that we've already studied about. This scene there with the elder brother and the father outside looking in is one of the most poignant scenes in the entire Bible. This portrayed the situation of the Jewish leaders in the time between the occurrence of the parable and the destruction of their nation by the Romans. That destruction, whether it occurred, was in their hands. Now, how can you make these three parables your own? First of all, ask yourself this question. What makes you happy? What makes you full of joy? And you need to be honest and prayerful in answering that question. Is it possessions? Is it money? Is it family? Is it participating in the kingdom, the rule of God? On that question rides your relationship to God. How do you feel? Question 2. How do you feel toward those who are degraded by their sin? For example, homeless people who may be dirty and smell bad. Alcoholics, drunks, passed out in the street. Prostitutes, homosexuals and lesbians, the poor, the aliens among us. How do you think your attitudes toward these degraded people are like or different from that of Jesus? And you need to get on the same side Jesus is. And then finally, you need to ask yourself, what do I need to do to bring my attitude toward these people in line with that of Jesus? Thank you.